9 years ago, life threw our next guest a curveball when she learned during her pregnancy that her baby would be born with a facial birth defect. Come with us as we learn about her fascinating journey that has led her to help other families by speaking out as an author and advocate.
Participate, engage, speak out, use your voice to be an effective advocate. The Voices in Advocacy podcast examines the diverse landscape of advocacy, exploring the ins and outs of building influence, driving change, and creating champion advocates. It's now time for the Voices in Advocacy podcast with your host, Roger Rickard.
Hello and welcome to Season 5 of the Voices in Advocacy podcast. I'm Roger Rickard, President and founder of Voices in Advocacy, where we work with organizations to inspire, educate, engage, and activate your supporters by turning them into effective, influential advocates. And this is the podcast dedicated to the art of advocacy. This podcast is for the people that work and engage in advocacy efforts. Now, let's get started. On today's show, we visit with Amy Mendillo, MPP. Amy is a writer, consultant, and advocate on health, family, and public policy issues for nonprofit organizations locally and nationally. Over the last 15 years, she has worked as a consultant on state-level Medicaid and social service issues, an advocate for local and city-level policy, and as a freelance writer-editor for the American Cleft, Palate-Craniofacial Association, where she currently serves as its Family Resources Committee and Board of Directors. Amy is a proud Cleft parent, an adoptive parent, and lives with her family in Providence, Rhode Island. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Amy to today's show. Amy, welcome, and how are you?
I'm doing well, Roger. Thank you so much for having me. It really is a pleasure to be here.
I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because, you created your own advocacy. And Amy and I met through our mutual advocacy work with the American Cleft Palate and Craniofacial Association. And she is the proud author of I've Just Seen a Face, which addresses the practical and emotional needs of families during a challenging time. You were not the first mother to deal with her baby being born with what is clinically called a facial birth defect. Why did you find it important to write a book on the subject and to help others?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Roger. I really certainly wasn't the first mother to deal with this. There are so many other people right now in who are dealing with these challenges. But my husband and I, at the time when we learned the news of our daughter's facial condition, looked around and couldn't quite put our hands on a guidebook that was up to date, that was comprehensive, that was really the information we needed. We felt confident in the information we received from our medical providers and from other sources, but we just felt like there was a hole. And so I wanted to fill that hole and offer the help that I could have used when I learned the news myself.
So speaking of learning the news, take us back to the beginning, and I think that was about 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And explain how you found out that your soon-to-be delivered daughter had this common facial birth defect or anomaly or
Yes.
or cause or whatever.
Yeah. I was pregnant and going to what is a very common sort of milestone during pregnancy, now a very standard 20-week prenatal ultrasound, which is a detailed scan where you learn all kinds of information about the anatomy of a baby, including the sex. I had been told by friends that this was almost a celebration of sorts. It's a tour of your baby's anatomy. And so I was excited. My husband and I had gone through a lot of infertility beforehand. And so we were really just so grateful to be pregnant. And unfortunately, this was not quite the celebration that we had hoped for, or at least at the time. The scan showed a cleft lip, which is a gap in the upper lip present at birth, and it showed a cleft palate, which is not always visible on a scan at that point because of limitations in the technology, but because the cleft palate, which is a hole in the roof in the mouth, was so severe in my daughter's case, it was visible. So we did learn, and we were really overwhelmed. We didn't know anything about the condition. We didn't know, we didn't realize that it would entail as much as it has. So it was a hard moment.
Uh, how do you process something like that? I mean, we,
Yeah,
we we all have gone to doctors at different points and have learned something along the way where it kind of takes you back a step first.
yeah,
You can even start that processing
right.
step. So, what was that processing like?
Yeah, it was overwhelming at first, and then we sort of turned to information gathering, very lots of information, as much as information as we could get our hands on. I remember having the brochures from the ACPA, the American Cleft Palate Craniofacial Association at the time, and how those were really felt like lifesavers. They were this physical thing that someone handed me at the clinic, that we could read and sort of pore over, and just learn as much as we can. And that did help. And what started out as overwhelming information sort of became comforting information.
You know, as a parent, I know it's tougher to hear news affecting our children than ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, yeah,
And I always, and in fact, not even just as a parent, I think if you hear news about your spouse or your parents or anything like
right.
that, it sometimes affects you much differently as you walk through that phase of things. And
Yeah,
it's interesting to note that there was something for you, that they
right.
had something that they could hand you
Yes,
that I would think first and foremost, okay, this isn't that rare.
right,
Did
right.
they share that at all? Did they talk about how
They,
many?
they, I think we learned eventually that it is the most common facial birth defect, cleft lip and or palate. It's
So,
one, yeah.
so how many people were born? How many babies, like in the U.S. annually, are born with this?
The figure is 1 in 600 births or 1 in 700 births, sort of depending on where you're looking. It's about 6 to 8,000 babies per year in the U.S. So uncommon and common at the same time. It's hard to, it's
Well,
depending on how you look at it.
yeah,
Yeah,
1 out of 6 or 700 is pretty common.
right.
And so you mentioned a brochure that ACPA was able to that ACPA had produced that your care team had was able to give you.
Yeah.
Can you explain what team care is in this
Yes.
process?
Yeah. Just as the sort of functions of the face and head are interconnected, so are the specialists who treat those conditions. So a cleft lip and a cleft palate can affect lots of different systems. And so the team of specialists who treat that condition include a whole list of specialists, and that in this case it includes a plastic surgeon, an oral surgeon, an ENT surgeon, an audiologist, an orthodontist, a dentist, a speech pathologist, nursing, feeding specialists, a psychologist, a sociologist. I might be repeating some here. A team coordinator, and I apologies if to the teams out there if I'm forgetting anyone. But it's a geneticist. It's a whole list of a whole group of specialists who work together. And it's an official designation. It's become the standard of care for cleft lip and palate and craniofacial care over the last at least 20 years.
Yeah,
So it's really remarkable that they get together and work together as they do.
yeah, and the diversity of those specialties
Right.
all pulling together and kind of encircling as an orbit around it.
Yeah,
All the care that they do is quite incredible, isn't it?
it is. And I hear them say over and over again as I talk to providers how the family, they consider the family to be part of that orbit, and I love that idea, and it is really true. The parents and the individual who is affected is part of the team as well.
Yeah. Now, I understand getting through the first year can be maybe the most difficult. What can you share with other parents about dealing with that first year?
Yeah, I try in my book to show parents that the treatment is contained. That at first it feels just overwhelming. There's so much to learn. There are procedures and operations and dental work and speech work that start during infancy, or even prior to birth is when everything gets lined up, and span childhood and sometimes extend even into young adulthood. Um, but as sprawling as that may feel at first, it really is well established. The treatment is effective, it's contained, so that there is a path to follow. It doesn't feel as overwhelming during the journey. And my book includes a lot of that information. It includes straight up information on the condition and its treatment, questions to ask. I include a lot of questions that families can kind of have in their back pocket to ask their team when they meet with them. Um, Honest discussions of the emotional issues that can come up, and a lot of stories from families that I interviewed for the book. So I hope that my book conveys those messages.
Well, and a lot of firsthand accounts.
Yes, a lot of stories. I interviewed about 100. Conducted about 150 in-depth interviews for the book, about half of which were with the specialists and providers who care for these families, and half of which were with fellow parents of children born with cleft lip and palate.
So something just dawned on me. The title of the book is I've Just Seen a Face.
Yes.
How did you come to that title?
The title is the title of a Beatles song from the very early album, the Help album, which came out, I believe, in 1965. The song is I've Just Seen a Face, and the words go, if I may, I've just seen a face I can't forget, the time or place where we've just met. She's just the girl for me, and I want all the world to see we've met.
She's just
Um,
the girl for me, and I want
yeah,
all the world to see that we have just met, huh?
yeah. I
That's
love the song. I've always loved this song, but then I was on a run and it occurred to me that that song might be applicable to this topic.
I think it's absolutely I think it's brilliant. I think it's spot on. I think it's very appropriate. I've just seen a face. Now, you decided that you needed to take this action by writing.
Yeah.
Why did you use that as the outlet?
Oh, um, it felt like the most appropriate to my skill set. I started as a classical musician. My first career was as a professional oboist, but I turned to public policy and health, and advocacy, and so it felt like a good match to write about a health topic, to conduct interviews, to write. It felt right for me. I guess that's the, but it's true that it could have been any other number of options to advocate for families and to provide that information, especially nowadays when I could have made a TikTok video that went viral, right? Hopefully, I mean, there's so many other outlets.
Right. And I agree with that. And you had that unique skill set of being able to write and pull and to do the research and the number of interviews that you did, both with
Yeah,
providers and with the families. To me, this book is about the voices of the people that have experienced many of the same emotions and experiences. So,
yeah.
why did you choose to include those other voices?
Uh, because storytelling is so powerful. I think one story, my story, is, and any story is powerful, but I think the more voices, the better, within reason. I think the more chances we have to kind of speak to a person and their feelings and their situation, the better. I wasn't sure at first how to include my story in this book, and I sort of settled on the idea of being the narrator, the first person narrator, and including short essays sprinkled sort of throughout the book as touch points, but to then showcase other people's stories more prominently throughout elsewhere.
Yeah. The Native American, it just reminds me that the Native Americans always say that you need to walk a mile in someone else's moccasins.
Oh, yeah, right.
And that's what you're doing here. You know,
Right.
you're walking through all that. And I love the fact that you brought up storytelling, because it is an incredibly key, important advocacy messaging tool.
Yes.
Was it difficult or more empowering when the message, in your case, was so personal?
Oh, I would say it was both. It was difficult to decide how much to share. Particularly in the case of a child, I didn't, the story actually really, I don't include very much about my daughter herself because it isn't really about her. It's about me and about my husband as parents. But I think that the more vulnerable we can be and the more of our stories we can tell and the more honest we can be, the more we can speak to people. As you said, storytelling is powerful. So it becomes, in fact, I think they're sort of flip sides of the same coin. The more empowered you feel when you put yourself out there.
And you kind of release that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
It becomes a vessel for you,
Right.
a vehicle.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking about asking you about the hardest thing about writing the book, but I think you kind of answered that from a standpoint of you made the decision that it wasn't going to be about the daughter, but it was going to be about you as parents and the journey that you went on.
Yes.
And I find that quite fascinating. How did your husband feel about that?
He was fine with that. He really was fine with that. He was I showed him drafts and I include some personal stuff about us, but nothing that he objected to, thank goodness. But it's sort of another angle on that is that I actually came to realize that in sharing, I realized that the sharing wasn't really about me. It was about helping people identify with aspects of the story. So in a way, in the end, it didn't feel as personal, or I didn't feel as vulnerable because it was for others. The sharing was to help others.
Yeah, I find that when I'm speaking and I have to sometimes tell personal stories about myself and my journey
Mm.
in this to make people relate to how to be an advocate, that at first I never thought those were important at all.
Mm.
And to do a little sidebar here, I was actually speaking in Oregon and was sitting with a mayor of the Salem, Oregon,
Mm.
and we were talking about a story, and the person sitting beside me had known me for 20 years and said I'd never heard that. And when they went up to introduce me, they said, Roger just told a story that I had never heard of him, and I'm going to tell him that he has to tell you today.
Wow.
And I quickly realized that people need to relate
Yes.
who's delivering the message. And so they're relating to you and your husband and
Right.
for this journey for the same exact reason.
Yes. Yes. Boy, so you were put on the spot.
Yeah, I have the gift of gab, I've been told. And so I quickly figured out. And by the way, that ended up being a part of my 7 actions of highly effective advocates, which is the first one, that you have to believe that you can make the difference. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
part of that development of that. So it's interesting.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
Back on topic here, because I
Yeah.
threw us around the world there. Uh, what help have other professional advocacy organizations been in supporting your journey as well as the journey of others?
Yeah, there's so many really amazing advocacy groups internationally, but especially in my case, the ones I've interacted with are in the US, the ACPA we have mentioned. The ACPA supports providers. It approves team care. It furthers research. It provides information to families. It sort of is the approval body for team care, and it is really, I think of it as sort of the mothership of team care in the U.S. But there's also My Face, which is a New York City-based organization that has school programs and support groups, all kinds of outreach programs for people with all craniofacial differences and facial differences. There's the Children's Craniofacial Association, and really About Face is a Canadian nonprofit. So there is support out there for individuals and families who need it. And there are also a lot of international groups, which I think might be more visible to people who are unaware of facial differences. The Global Smile Foundation is one I've worked with, but of course there are others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there seems to be a move afoot to help educate people more and more than there had been in the past. Would you agree with that statement, or?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Sort of efforts to be visible, to sort of promote the acceptance of differences, of facial differences in particular. It's so important. There are people born with facial differences or who acquire facial differences, but all of us are different in our own ways. So I really think of it as an extension of everyone's ongoing effort to be thoughtful.
Yeah. So mentioning a number of different advocacy groups, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the word advocacy?
Yeah, I love this. Is such a good question. I think of advocacy. What comes to mind, the first word is speaking up. Speaking up for a person, another person, speaking up for yourself, speaking up for a cause, speaking up for values you care about. That's what I think of with advocacy. But I also think of it as sort of uppercase and lowercase a, uppercase advocacy. And you're nodding. This really is so. This is your area. But uppercase advocacy, capital A advocacy, being sort of the formal things we can do to influence change. Through legislation, through writing letters, through speaking at hearings, all that stuff. But I especially like lowercase advocacy, A for advocacy, what we do in our daily lives with our friends, with our loved ones in a medical office to speak up for ourselves and others, to really be true to our values.
And to show some empathy and concern for others.
Yes,
that are going
exactly.
through it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that you describe yourself as being an introverted person.
Yeah.
And how did you find the courage and the fortitude to speak up, to be that voice, to advocate for others?
Yeah. I guess there are sort of two angles to it. The first is that I just sort of force myself to be brave a lot. I'm not the loudest person or the biggest presence in the room, but I've practiced in a way that, and I've received feedback that's positive, and that's of course helps sort of build a practice of being brave. But I've also realized, sort of back to what we were talking about earlier, that it isn't about me to advocate. It's to help others and to help causes that I care about and that I think others care about. And so that pulls me in very strongly, maybe even stronger.
And I think that's the purest form of advocacy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So with that, what's been the biggest reward in writing I've just seen a face?
Yeah, it's truly helping families who need it. It's hearing from a person who isn't my mother or a family member, a pure stranger, that the work has helped them. That's of course really just very rewarding. But it's also the people I've met in this community. I have done so much research, and I've sort of contacted people from out of the blue for interviews. People who've written articles, that didn't know me, and were incredibly generous, offering information, offering tips and tricks and gold nuggets from what they've learned over decades of experience. So the community is amazing, as I'm sure I agree. Yeah.
I have only been involved in a short period of time, and I'm very proud of the work that the people do that are a part of the community, and how people kind of row the boat in the same direction.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
How can people get your book, I've Just Seen a Face?
Yes, it is available online, sort of everywhere books are sold: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop, and my website will take you to all of those places. My website is my whole name as one word, amymendillo.com, and that's the place to go.
And that's Amy, AMYMENDILLO.com.
Exactly.
I implore people to go there. You also have Cleft Parent News.
Yes, it's a month.
Can people go to the website to sign up for that?
They can sign up for that. Yes, it's my monthly-ish newsletter for families of cleft affected kids. If of any age, from birth, prior to birth, through young adulthood, through adulthood, to sort of stay up on the latest news and discussions about all the issues that can affect these families.
We both are with the American Cleft Palate-Craniofacial Association. Can parents learn more through their website?
Absolutely. ACPA Cares is the URL. ACPA Cares. There are .org. Yes. ACPAcares.org. Absolutely. Thank you. Families can go to that site to find a team, find an ACPA approved team in their area. It's critical first step. I say in my book, if you do nothing else, go to this website and find a team. And also can find basic information. The brochures that I think back to, all those years ago are available through ACPA.
Wonderful. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to
add? I'm happy. What about you?
I'm great.
This was really such a fun discussion. Really, Roger. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's wonderful. I very much enjoyed the conversation that we've had today with this wonderful, warm, loving advocate and author, Amy Mendillo. Amy, thank you for all you do and all the best.
Thank you so much, Roger. Likewise, all the best to you too.
Let's face it, today's advocacy arena is just plain noisy. Organizations are stretched. You need every advantage to make sure your issue gets the attention it deserves and your voice heard. The RAP Index is the best way to do just that by finding your stakeholders' relationships and engagement power. Get past the noise. Know who your people know. Go to rapindex.com. That's rapindex.com and tell them Roger sent you for a special offer. If you like today's podcast, head over to where you find your podcasts and subscribe to the Voices in Advocacy podcast. A big thank you to today's guest. I appreciate your time and the unwavering passion for advocacy you have. Well, that's it for this episode of Voices in Advocacy. Remember, you have the power to be an effective, influential advocate. Now go out and make it a better world.
We hope you enjoyed today's Voices in Advocacy podcast and look forward to you joining us again next week. To learn more about Voices in Advocacy, go to our website, voicesinadvocacy.com.